Well, good morning, and can I welcome everyone to this, the 7th meeting in 2026 of the Public Audit Committee. The first agenda item is for the committee to consider whether or not this morning to take agenda items 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8 in private. Are we all agreed? We are agreed, thank you very much. And the first agenda item of public business for us this morning is consideration of the Accounts Commission Audit Scotland reports, primarily into delayed discharges, a symptom of the challenges facing health and social care, but also the briefing note, also a joint production by the Accounts Commission and Audit Scotland on Community Health and Social Care Performance 2025. I'm very pleased that we're joined at the committee this morning by Caroline Lamb, who's the Director General Health and Social Care and the Chief Executive of NHS Scotland. And alongside Caroline Lamb this morning is Derek Grieve. Derek is the Director of Health and Social Care, Performance and Delivery in the Scottish Government. We've got some questions to put to you on both the briefing note and the report. But before we get to those questions, Director General, can I invite you to give us an opening statement?
Thank you very much indeed, Convener. I welcome Audit Scotland's report on delayed discharge and the Community Health and Social Care Performance briefing. And my team and I have carefully reviewed these reports and the recommendations made. The Scottish Government shares the view that despite the hard work we've undertaken with COSLA, health boards and health and social care partnerships, more must be done to make sure that people receive the care they need in the right place and at the right time. We agree with Audit Scotland that delayed discharges have a detrimental impact, most importantly on the people affected by those delays, but also on the wider health system. We also agree that delays are a symptom of the many challenges faced by the health and social care system. As the committee will be aware, the delivery of social care support is the statutory responsibility of local government. And we have been working with COSLA and local systems through the Collaborative Response and Assurance Group to explore the challenges, to ensure that there is common understanding of the impact, and to look at good practice and improvement. The recommendations in the delayed discharge report are complex, particularly those around performance, cost modelling and evaluation. Addressing them will require careful whole system thinking, particularly given the different approaches to integration and service delivery across Scotland and the different systems and processes in play across the country. Ministers have asked the Collaborative Response and Assurance Group, which ministers co-chair with COSLA, to consider those recommendations as a whole and to develop a partnership approach to addressing them. Alongside this work, local systems continue to work hard to share best practice, to reduce delays and to deliver on the commitments in the operational improvement plan. And despite the challenges the report sets out, some areas have delivered improvements through a whole system approach. The Community Health and Social Care Performance briefing reinforces the need for stronger, more consistent performance information as an essential foundation to improving outcomes across community health and social care. Once again, we agree with that, and we will continue to work with partners across the system, building on the work that we have already taken forwards to provide the whole system precious dashboard. This work recognises how important it is that every part of the system can see how their performance compares to others, to identify areas for improvement. It also enables different services to see their performance as part of the whole system, helping to drive shared accountability and a common understanding of risk. We'll be very happy to answer the questions that the committee has. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I begin by asking you whether you accept in full the key messages, findings and recommendations of these reports?
Yes, we accept the key messages and the recommendations. I think we accept that also some of those recommendations will be complex to implement, evolving as they do, or absolutely requiring a whole system approach. And that's why ministers have taken the approach of asking CRAG, the Collaborative Response and Assurance Group, I'll call it CRAG from now on if that's okay, to work to ensure that there is absolutely a whole system approach taken to implementing those recommendations.
I mentioned at the start that you are the Chief Executive of NHS Scotland, so you must be concerned, mustn't you, when you see figures like 11.7% of hospital beds being unnecessarily occupied by people because of delayed discharge. That's 720,000 days are lost because of delayed discharge, and 2/3 of those delays are involving people over the age of 75. I mean, what's your response to that?
Well, first of all, yes, I am very concerned by those figures. I'm concerned because of the impact that it has on the individuals. We know how bad it is for people to be in hospital in an acute bed, particularly for longer than they need to be. We know how that involves deconditioning and how actually the evidence is that the more longer people spend in hospital, the more time and the more care support they're likely to need when they do get home. So I'm concerned from that perspective, those individuals, and wanting to make sure they can get back into a homely environment as soon as possible. But yes, there is also no doubt that the levels of our hospital beds that are occupied by people who don't have a clinical need to be in them has an impact on how the whole system operates. And that's why we have been so focused both on that whole system approach in terms of how bringing all those partners to the table through CRAG, looking at where things are working well, looking at how systems can learn from each other, but also the things that we can do within the NHS. So what can we do within the NHS to ensure that people don't get admitted to our hospitals unless they absolutely need to be admitted, and that if they're admitted that their stay is as short as possible, and that we're also doing everything that we can, working with partners to ensure that we're planning for somebody to be discharged from the moment in which they arrive in hospital. I think it's also important to remember that 97% of discharges happen without delay, and so it's important to remember that, but also to absolutely acknowledge the impact that those people who are delayed the impact that has on them as individuals, but also on the way in which the system works as a whole.
Okay. I mean, you've mentioned a couple of times a whole system approach, and in this report, Exhibit 3 sets out the areas where there are contributory factors to this systematic failure, and it talks in there about financial pressures, but also makes the observation, this is the Accounts Commission and Audit Scotland making this observation, that governance is complicated, that we've got an ageing population, but there's a lack of planning for future housing needs of an ageing population, and of course something that we've discussed over the last few years repeatedly are workforce shortages, not just in the National Health Service but also in social care, I think, in particular. So I wonder whether you could explain to us how you are addressing each of those challenge areas which are identified in this report.
Yeah, Convener, happy to do that. So if we take the first one, which is around the financial challenge, there is absolutely no doubt that there is a financial challenge across both health and social care services and that we need to redesign systems, make sure that we're working as effectively as possible and make sure that we're using every penny that is provided to us from the public purse as effectively as possible. And in setting out our service renewal framework and the population health framework that were both published in June last year, we have very much set out the progress that we need to make around both moving the focus of our systems towards prevention and early intervention, which is when those interventions are cheaper, but also needing to look at how we work differently across the system, particularly within the service renewal framework. So more activity delivered in primary care in the community, again, away from the most expensive sectors, which is our acute hospitals, but also a focus on digital, a focus on how boards work better together on a collaborative basis. And you'll be aware that we've recently published ministerial directions around subnational planning. So all of that is around tackling the financial pressures, understandably, particularly from a health perspective. In terms of governance, I think we accept that there are many different roles that organisations play here. So the health service has its role to play. Local government absolutely still has the statutory responsibility and has a role to play, and the integration authorities who seek to join those areas up. Also, Audit Scotland referred to the important role of the third sector and the independent sector, and that's all important too. And I think that is complex. Those relationships work best when they work really well locally. Certainly, from my perspective as Chief Executive of the NHS, having our chief officers sitting at the executive tables in our NHS boards, and therefore absolutely part of understanding the totality of system pressures and their contribution towards those, and also where they can make a larger contribution, has been key to that. We do have an ageing population. That's not going to change. And I think as well, then it's important for us to look at how we can deal with the demands of that ageing population in the way that is most appropriate to that population and helps the functioning of the system. So I would point to areas like frailty units at the front door and the success that some of those are having in reducing the length of stay. So our primary objective is to try and prevent that elderly population from needing to be admitted to hospital in the first place, but where they are admitted, trying to ensure that they can get home as early as possible. In relation to workforce, so yes, there are challenges, particularly challenges around international recruitment. So we were making good progress in international recruitment. That's obviously been made more difficult by decisions at a UK government level. But that said, actually, the SSSC workforce report, which the most recent one, looks at the workforce as at 2024, and that does show an increase of around 6.36%, I think, in the care home and care at home workforce from 2015, and a smaller increase, but still an increase of 1.4% between 23 and 24. We have more recent statistics available to us on the NHS workforce, and the latest quarterly report at December shows a small increase in that workforce. Now, there will continue to be pressures, and we need to focus both on how we continue to attract and retain people in our workforce, but also how we look to design our services, how we look to use digital, so that we're focusing our workforce on the jobs that only people can do. And I think your final point was around housing, and I think we would absolutely recognise, and as you'll be aware, the moves that Scottish Government are making at the moment to try to address some of the housing issues, and that includes remote and island communities where it is particularly difficult to attract and retain staff because of the challenges that they have in accessing housing. Sorry, that's been a bit of a canter through all of that. Happy to pick up on any of that in a bit more detail.
No, I recognise it was a wide-ranging question, and well done for remembering all of those different headings that I put to you. I've just got a couple of other questions I want to raise to you. I mean, I suppose one of my overall points is we've got integration authorities, we've got integrated joint boards. You are the Director General of Health and Social Care. But we're having all these issues with delayed discharge still, which is about whether or not we've got a joined-up social care and health system, isn't it? I mean, doesn't this report suggest that's not working? The integration isn't working. The plan that we've had for the last 10 years has not delivered what it was supposed to deliver.
I think that the report acknowledges that the delayed discharges are a symptom of the pressure across the system, and we've just run through a number of those, and they are multifaceted. So I don't think that it is fair to say that integration isn't working. I think that integration has actually delivered a lot of improvements on the ground. Whether it's enough to address the challenges that we face, I think is a question. But we still, I think it's still really important that we focus on what's right for the person at the middle of this, and that is done better by looking across systems than by focusing on a single siloed system.
Okay, I've just got one very particular area I want to ask you about, which is something mentioned in the report, which is this whole thing around power of attorney. And it seems, which is gets us almost into a legal area, doesn't it? But it's about whether people have got access to establish power of attorney arrangements with their relatives or with whoever. That seemed to be one of the reasons why we have delayed discharge, because those arrangements are not in place. Could you shed a bit more light on that and perhaps explain what the government is doing to tackle that? Because that does seem to be one of the driving forces behind delayed discharge and people getting caught up in the system.
Yeah, that is absolutely the case, and the issues around adults with incapacity, which is how they're described in the system. So these are people who don't have the capacity to make their own decisions and for whom there isn't any power of attorney in place. And you're absolutely right, Convener, that creates a difficult position, because then local authorities have to apply for guardianship arrangements in order for those decisions to be able to be made on behalf of people. And that is a complex legal process, and there are some different approaches to it and different appetites for risk around that across the country. So the first thing I suppose we've been doing as a government is recognising that we need to promote the need for people to have power of attorney in place, all of us, all the population, in order to make sure that we are prepared to deal with those eventualities that arrive in life. And we have done some publicity campaigns around all of that. At the moment, our approach is trying to identify the impact of those and what some of the barriers as well are to people being able to put in power of attorney, particularly when it's seen as just an additional expense in terms of everything else that people are dealing with. But there's also a legislative route that we need to look at as well. So the legislation, the Adults with Incapacity Act, we've been out to consultation. The government has been out to consultation on that. We've published the results of that consultation and are now working on what the policy response would be, bearing in mind that there are some quite complex interplays with the European Commission on Human Rights legislation around that, and we need to make sure that we are protecting the rights and dignity of the individual, at the same time as recognising that for most people who fall into this category, hospital is absolutely the wrong place for them to be, and we need to find a way in which we can address that. And in terms of numbers, yeah, they are significant as a proportion of the people who are delayed, and the people who tend to be delayed for the longest as well. Derek.
If I can add something, Convener. Caroline's exactly right. The Scottish Government has a role here to promote the importance of power of attorney, but it'd be fair to say that it's not just the Scottish Government's job in this space, and we know that the social care workforce, the social worker workforce also plays a really important role in this space, because they are often the interface between the family and patients. Particularly before they reach that crisis point, because, as Caroline has alluded to, having families go through some of this process when there's a wider crisis in play and somebody's in hospital is really challenging. So the ability to have a power of attorney in place, supporting those difficult conversations with family are really important. But as Caroline rightly said, having a power of attorney when you don't need one is probably the place we want us all to be in.
I mean, very quickly, are people eligible for legal aid to help them pay for these? Because they aren't inexpensive, are they, to the establishment of power of attorney?
No, that's right. They're not inexpensive. My understanding, I will confirm this to you, Convener, but my understanding is that people are eligible, but whether the Legal Aid Board is able to meet the whole demand on that, I think, is another challenge.
It might be a Scottish governmental issue as well, of course. Yeah. OK, Colin Beattie's got some questions for you. Colin.
Thank you, Convener. I was really looking at what needs to happen in regard to delayed discharge. The Auditor General told the committee that the delayed discharge reflects a wider, long-standing failure to shift the balance of care from hospitals to community settings. Since ever I've been in this committee, that's been the headline. Nothing's changed, and that's 15 years I've been sitting here. Malcolm Bell from the Accounts Commission told the committee that IGB's reserves are being continually depleted, often to shore up day-to-day work, rather than what it should be doing, of course, which is transforming the whole service offering. And witnesses were clear that progress depends on clearer leadership, stronger governance, firmer accountability at both national and local levels. But none of this seems to have happened. I mean, I say again, this is a repeat. This comes up every time a report comes in front of this committee. There's no movement. Why? So
I think it's fair to say that a lot of us would recognise that our strategic intent for some time has been to move, as I said in answer to the convener's question, has been to move the activity in our systems away from our acute hospitals and towards the community, towards social care, towards community services. And when we published the service renewal framework in June, we were really clear that that wasn't a new approach, but that what we needed to do was to look at what are the concrete actions that are needed to ensure that we can implement that approach. I think one of the first concrete actions that we've taken in that is the additional funding that's being made available to general practice in the draft budget for 26-27 that will enable us to increase the capacity in general practice and to take an enhanced focus on that preventative role that general practice can play. I think it's also important that we're able to look at the spend in its totality across both the acute sector, primary and community care, and actually some of the areas where we've seen progress being made in terms of reducing delayed discharges, but also in terms of all the other measures that contribute towards that. So reducing admissions, reducing length of stay, and accelerating the processes for discharge. One of the most successful areas where we've seen progress has been in NHS Lothian, and actually in that case that was achieved by some of the funding that was made available by the Scottish Government being directed by the Health Board towards the social care partnership, and that has achieved results. So I think we are starting to really understand the interventions that make a difference here and to see some progress, but I would absolutely accept that hasn't been as fast as we would want it to be, and part of what we need to do, because there's only a finite pot of money here, part of what we need to do is to ensure that our acute sector is functioning as productively as it can, in order that we're able to identify ways in which we can provide more support into community and social care. Derek, do you want to?
If I could add just a couple of things. So I think the Audit Scotland report does outline that the operational improvement plan gives some really strong signals of us seeking to shift the balance of care, and that comes with additional funding, but it's being used as a means to leverage existing funding rather than being the only funding available. But I think some of the examples that I think Caroline gave earlier on around developing frailty units, having hospital-at-home programmes in place, looking at a wider range of interventions that are community-based to shift the balance from what is acute system into elsewhere. And if I can give you a little bit of hope in this space, as well as the Lothian example that Caroline has outlined, we know, and we've taken this to Crag as an exemplar, we know in Forth Valley, for example, there's been an explicit decision taken to reinvest a quantum of funding from the acute services and redirect that into community care services. So there are practical examples that I'm seeing now of systems doing exactly as what we're looking for, which is shifting that balance of care.
Well, pleased to hear that. Right from the beginning, as I understand it, the concept was that wouldn't necessarily be additional funds going into the IGBs, but it would be a movement of funds from secondary to primary. And that was the sticking point, of course, because nobody wants to lose any part of their budget. And it never really happened. You described the situation where it has happened, but it's certainly not the generality. How are you going to stimulate this? How are you going to push people to actually deliver what was originally intended? And it seems almost a moot point after 20 years.
So I think that how we stimulate that is partly through sharing the good practice that Derek's described in Forth Valley, but there's also good practice, I think, to be shared in NHS Lothian as well. I think that the approach to the whole systems pressure dashboard has been to give all those people who are involved in different elements of the system that overview of what's happening in the system as a whole, so that they see their responsibility in relation to the overall performance of the system, because everybody working in these systems wants to do the best thing for people, and that requires having a system that's working at its optimum. I think the other thing that has been a shift, so leadership is really, really important in relation to seeing that, not just having a focus on the acute sector, but also seeing that how primary community social care impact on the acute sector. And I think in that context, I would note that over our recent appointments to chief execs in NHS boards, a significant number of those have experience of working in social care or an experience of working as chief officers in social care. So we have been developing a leadership cadre who absolutely understand the interdependencies and who are absolutely interested in doing the best thing for their population by ensuring that the health board is doing its bit by doing whatever it can to keep people out of hospital in the first place, through hospital at home, through frailty units, even the work of the ambulance service, with the ambulance service now only actually conveying around about 50% of its calls out into hospital. So there's a whole healthcare system approach to trying to ensure that people stay out of hospital, and then to actually working through multidisciplinary teams and others to make sure that people are being discharged, and an increasing recognition that actually, as Derek said, where there is money to be spent, it is better directed at the areas of the system that can provide support to those more expensive aspects of the system, and increasingly I think a recognition that that's what we need to do with the money as a whole, rather than just being able to do that when there's additional bits of money being made available.
You touched on leadership, which has obviously been part of the Auditor General's report, and there are obviously concerns about the quality of leadership, the governance and accountability. And again, these are themes that come forward again and again and again, but we don't seem to see any movement on it, or certainly nothing that that would give us confidence. How are you going to strengthen leadership, both nationally and locally, but also the important areas of governance and accountability?
So I think that we are making progress in all of that. I think that the whole way in which we have brought the system together to work together. So starting with CRAG, which is co-chaired by ministers and Councillor Kelly, representing COSLA. So with starting up from that perspective, working with all our local systems, ensuring that local systems have the data that enables them to understand how they're performing respective to others, and to therefore be able to identify where their areas are that they can improve, and also being able to, within their own systems, so within our systems, the Health Board working closely with their IJB and Health and Social Care partnerships, all of that is critical to the systems starting to appreciate where their focus needs to be to actually improve the performance across the whole system, and the areas that they need to prioritise. And sometimes that is complex in terms of governance, and complex in terms of people being prepared to give things up in order to achieve the better good for the whole. But I think we are seeing areas where that happened. Derek pointed to the example in Forth Valley, where money has been shifted from the acute sector into social and community care. We've seen similar approaches in Lothian, and I think our health boards are certainly moving to a position where the thing to do in response to pressures is not to simply try and open more acute beds, but to look really carefully at what they can do to support their social care, community care, primary care sectors. I think that is absolutely understood across the system. There is more for us to do, and it remains a work in progress. But I do believe that in the face of all the pressures that we face around demographics and around funding, the work that we are doing, it's not enabling us yet to see a big reduction in the delayed discharge, but it is enabling us to see a stable position, and that might not otherwise be the case.
Well, we've had 20 years, well, in my case, 15 years of reassurances from yourself and your predecessors over the years. Why should we believe that this time it's going to work? You paint a very rosy picture, but the Section 22 report doesn't paint quite such a rosy picture. How can we get that reassurance that things are actually happening, that we are moving in the correct direction? So
I'm not sure that I would describe it as a rosy picture that I'm painting. I think that there are very, very significant challenges across the piece. However, I also think that we have set out conditions that make it possible for systems to start to change. So I've already referenced the money that's going into primary care to support enhanced capacity in primary care, and that's accompanied by requirements around data reporting, which I know has been an interest to this committee before, about the data, the quality of the data that we have around primary care, so that we will be able to assess that. I think as well the actions that we've set out in the population health framework, but probably even more so in the service renewal framework, around how we work differently across our NHS boards, so through the concept of the West Subnational and the East Subnational, looking at where all the opportunities are for working differently and more collaboratively in boards, between boards, but also importantly with those partners in social care as well.
We've talked about money. What's actually needed? I mean, IGBs need sustainable financial security in order to take forward what they're supposed to deliver. And that's clearly very patchy. What can be done to ensure that that financial stability, that funding is in place so that they can deliver timely discharge services?
So that there is, I think the answer to that question is that first of all we need to do our best as a government to make sure that we're making as much money as we can available, and that's within quite a constrained financial envelope. So the local government settlement is at a record level this year, and it will be up to local government to make decisions about how it chooses to deploy that money and what it prioritises. As I've said, and as the committee is very well aware, social care is the statutory responsibility of local government, and I'm sure the committee will be wanting to speak to COSLA about its role, the role of COSLA and local government in managing delays as well. However, we also spend a very, very significant amount of money, and so I think our focus needs to be not just on trying to quantify what more money we might need in the knowledge that that funding is not readily available. Our focus also needs to be on how we are absolutely making use of that money in the best possible way. And I think that involves making sure that we are not doing rework and duplication. So all the work that we've done around getting it right for everyone, which is focused around looking at the person and what they need and ensuring that the multidisciplinary teams who need to come together, share the information about that person and can make the decisions around providing the best support for that person without that needed to be repeated multiple times across the system. I think there are opportunities for us to use digital in a different way, both to support people but also to free up time and capacity in our staff teams to focus more on that work that absolutely needs to be done face to face by people. I think there are great examples around our virtual wards and the fact that the work that they're doing in virtual monitoring and keeping people out of hospital and therefore keeping them in an environment that is provides better value for money. So all of these things, I don't think there is any silver bullet here. If there was, I think we probably would have found it by now. This is all about looking at multiple opportunities across the system to make small gains and bringing those all together. Derek, is there anything you want to add to that?
I think maybe just to say, and I'm sure the committee will be aware of this, as the Audit Scotland report has identified, as well as the real human cost to delayed discharge, that there is a financial cost to high levels of delayed discharge, and that money could be used elsewhere in a different way. And I think that's what our focus is, to try and support those local systems and those with the authority to make those decisions to shift that investment instead of delivering acute hospital care, which is probably the most expensive care that we can provide, to an alternative and, a bit more importantly, more appropriate form of care, which often involves community-based care.
This is what I'm interpreting from what you're saying to me. Would it be correct to say that you have moved away from the original concept of transferring resources from the secondary sector to the primary sector and are now looking to find other funds to go into the IGBs?
So the IJBs have always been funded partly by health boards and partly by local government. And I'm not, what I am saying is that we are absolutely still looking at where are the opportunities in our secondary care sector. As Derek's just pointed out, there's a huge opportunity in our secondary care sector that if we can reduce delayed discharges, we free up resource, we free up beds, we free up staff time. We free up staff time that is unnecessarily spent looking after people who do not need that level of care. But that, I think, is just one example. I think there are other ways in which we are looking through the service renewal framework at ways in which I've talked about the subnational work, ways in which we can increase productivity and identify ways in which we can shift resource from the secondary care centre into primary and community care. And that's not about winners and losers in all of this. This is about us making sure that we are providing the resource in the area that it makes most difference to people and can actually have the best outcomes for people. And in amongst all of that, it is challenging because actually it is much more difficult to identify resource to release at the same time as you're under all this pressure. And that's why we have been trying to sort of seed initiatives like the frailty units, like hospital at home, like the virtual wards, like some of the money that's gone into social care, in order to demonstrate to systems the difference that can make. Because ultimately, this work relies on us. We can provide some of the enablers, but it relies on individual systems actually identifying where those opportunities are. So, yeah, it is absolutely about trying to shift away from our focus on the secondary and acute sector, but doing that through having a greater focus on primary community social care and also on prevention.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. In answer to one of Colin Beattie's questions, you said the answer is not more acute beds. But what about when health boards like Forth Valley close wards? I mean, the closed ward A11, and so reduce the capacity of beds that they've got. I mean, do you have to sanction that? Is that a decision purely for the health board to take? Do you have a general view about contraction in capacity like that? I mean, if I look at this report, the lack of available beds is clearly highlighted as an issue. Yeah.
If I can come back on that, Convener. So the closing of the ward in Forth Valley was exactly the example I was giving. So the Forth Valley took the decision that there was a ward at a high level of delayed discharge, and it was equating to the proportion of delayed discharge. They closed that ward, transferred the resources, was going into staffing and resourcing a ward for that purpose, and reinvested it for community activity. I think so. So it's an exemplar, I think, rather than something to be frowned upon. The care is delivered in a different way, and people are being supported in a different way, rather than people being required to be staying in hospital when they didn't need to be.
Yes, I'm afraid, Mr. Grieve, the families whose relatives were in that ward would not see that as an exemplar. And I won't go into any more details, but let me assure you that is not how they saw it. Neither, frankly, is it how the staff at the hospital saw it either. Anyway, I'm going to move on and invite Graham Simpson.
Thank you, Convener. I completely agree with what you've just said. I do want to go back to something the Convener was exploring earlier, and it was around this issue of power of attorney, which is important for people to have, but just I was reflecting on experiences that I've had, and there are cases where people's health goes downhill very, very quickly, and so there's actually not time to put a power of attorney in. Do you think, therefore, that maybe we need to put in place a system that deals with that kind of situation so that families can act pretty quickly?
I think the ideal would be for all of us to be putting in place power of attorneys at the point where we are assuming that it's going to be a long time before we ever need those power of attorneys. And I accept the point that the convener's made about the expense associated with that. but obviously the ideal is that we all do that at a point where we are, fully able to do that. Because you're right, sometimes people's health can decline incredibly quickly. So I think it would be good to get to the point where people are far more focused on thinking about the what if, and therefore making those arrangements. But I think we also need to be really clear that we need a better solution to where people are unable to put in the power of attorney. We need a better solution to how that can be dealt with, and how people's dignity and can be maintained, and they can be the power of guardianship can be put in place, or whatever it's called in the future, in a way that enables them to be accommodated in the place that is right for them. I think it's also, so some of the work, I think it's highlighted in the Audit Scotland report, that East Ayrshire have been doing, working with Alzheimer's Scotland, so to identify people who are coming to that point where they may no longer have capacity. And so there are the things that we can do for the people, try and encourage people who are not close to that point yet. But there's also something about targeting those people who still have some capacity but may not have that capacity for a huge amount of time longer. And I think it's really important we look at those folk as well.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll move on. We've received a letter from Carers Scotland. I don't know if you've seen that. You haven't. Well, I'll quote from it then, if that's okay. So this came last month. So it refers to a report that Carers Scotland did called State of Caring, which was published in November 2025. That found that just 34% of unpaid carers said they were involved in decisions about discharge and what care and treatment was needed. Only 13% had been asked about their ability and willingness to provide care. That was down from 19% in 2024, and just 12% felt they'd been provided with sufficient support on discharge to protect their health and well-being and that of the person they care for. So those figures, if they're to be believed, and I've no reason to disbelieve them, they're pretty shocking, aren't they?
Yes, the Carers Act provides that carers should be involved in the arrangements for discharging the person who they care for, and that's obviously hugely important. It's hugely important in terms of the carer understanding what some of the requirements might be, being able to be confident that they can manage that, and so I think those statistics are extremely disappointing. We have been working to provide more educational resources for staff across health and social care to ensure that they understand that requirement to involve carers. And I think there's also some good examples, but again, probably not consistent across the piece of carer link workers being put in place in some systems to absolutely specifically to support carers, because carers do an incredibly valuable job, and it is really important that local systems are able to provide the support for them to be able to continue to perform that role for their loved ones.
I'll just read you another bit. I mean, it's a very good letter. It says the lack of support for impaired carers risks unplanned readmission of individuals, poorer outcomes, and increases the cost of caring to carers' own health. Carers are already experiencing high levels of poor health, with 30% living with poor physical health and 36% poor mental health. A lack of involvement in decisions around care has long-term consequences. And they go on to mention the Carers Scotland Act, which you've referred to, and they say that we welcome the report's call, that's the report that they did, not the Auditor General's report, for integration authorities with their partner NHS boards and councils to ensure they fully implement their duties and responsibilities for including unpaid carers as set out in the Act. So given the figures that I've just quoted, it would appear that the duties in the Act are not being met. So why not?
So I think that probably part of the reason why the duties are not being consistently met are around sort of the complexity of some of our discharge arrangements. I think that's why having carer link workers has actually made such a positive impact. And that's certainly, I think, an initiative that we would be looking to spread elsewhere. So there's something about that general awareness and the educational materials and making sure that health and social care staff across the piece understand that requirement. But I think also there's something about how that we make it as easy as possible for staff to ensure that carers are being involved and are being engaged. And I think that's why the link model is a really appropriate one. I also note some of the comments in there about the pressure on carers, and I think the move towards having short breaks for carers is really important in terms of addressing some of that pressure as well.
It just seems to me that we've got an Act which was brought in 10 years ago, and yet the requirements in that Act are not being fulfilled. And it's all very well. I mean, you accept they should be fulfilled, but we really need to be doing better, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah, you agree. Okay. So how are we going to do better? If we come back here in a year's time, will the figures be better?
So I think that, as I've said already, I think that example of having carer link workers in local systems has demonstrated that is a route through which we can absolutely do this better, and I think we would want to look at encouraging other areas to take up that as an approach. Okay.
The term rosy picture was used earlier, and you said it's not quite a rosy picture. It's not quite a rosy picture, is it? Because actually, if you look at the figures in the Auditor General's report, there is actually a graph. I think it's Exhibit 1, but it shows there was, as you'd expect, a huge dip in delayed discharges during COVID, and then it's rocketed, and now it's basically a straight line. So it's stubbornly high. It's not coming down. There's the occasional blip, but essentially it's high. It's probably higher than it's ever been, and we don't seem to be getting any improvement. So why is that, given that we've known about this issue for years?
Well, I think the Audit Scotland report actually usefully identifies the pressures that are out there around money, around workforce, and around other issues. So there is a huge amount of work going on across the system and overseen by CRAG, with really regular reporting through that group. So we know which partnership areas are doing better than the Scottish national average. We know which are struggling against the Scottish national average. We know which partnerships are improving, which aren't. So we will have conversations with those partnerships about what are the challenges that they're dealing with that are impacting on their performance, and a huge amount of work going on across the piece. And as I've already described, I don't think that there is one measure that you can take here that would change things. I think it is about lots of small gains within the system, and the delayed discharges. That is the symptom, if you like. That's the headline figure we see. But behind that, the things that we need to focus on are about preventing people from being admitted to hospital in the first place. Once they are admitted, making sure that their stay in the acute sector is as short as possible, and that if they're then moved on to any step-down facility, that stay is also as short as possible, and that they're being discharged, and even initiatives like the discharge to assess have demonstrated real success in that when somebody is assessed for their care needs in their own familiar home environment, they're generally assessed as needing less care and support than they would be if they were assessed in an unfamiliar environment in a hospital. So all those factors are really important in ensuring that we're able to maximise the contribution of our workforce and the money that we have in terms of being able to tackle this. I mean, I think that I would absolutely accept that the level of delayed discharges is higher than we would want to see it. We have seen dips, so we have seen it coming down, and it has been, I think we regard it as being sort of stubborn over the period, certainly since we came out of the pandemic. But we could have also continued to see an increase in that, and that the position is stable. It's not stable where we'd want it to be. We would like it to be stable at a much lower level. Derek,
and just to say, and I think again the Audit Scotland report usefully just highlights some of the wider challenges, not least fiscal and others, but the demographic challenge. And I think the Audit Scotland report quite clearly illustrates that the proportion of people who are over 65, for example, has been increasing significantly, over 20%. So. Caroline is absolutely right. It is a stubbornly static position at a too high a level, but that's almost despite the demands being placed in the system increasing.
Okay. Yeah, and there's a knock-on impact, of course, on ambulance waiting times. For example, when you've got people in hospital who don't need to be there, ambulances turn up, bringing people to A&E. There's nowhere for them to go, so there's a whole system impact. Can I ask about? I'm going to ask about costs because Mr. Grieve earlier mentioned costs, but according to the report, there's actually been no impact. No published information on the cost of delayed discharges since 2019-20, and I'm just wondering why not? If we managed to do it then, why haven't we managed to do it since?
So I think the simple answer to that question, the straightforward answer, is that Public Health Scotland believe that there is not sufficient rigour around the financial data that they have available to them in order to be able to assess the cost. And it is complex assessing the cost, because costs will vary depending on exactly where somebody is being accommodated, and also it's I think the Audit Scotland report quotes the gross cost, so you would have to then offset the cost of the care packages or care homes or whatever accommodation is provided. But I think we would all agree that is a metric that we would like to see. We obviously have our own internal assessment of what the cost to the healthcare system is, but we would like to be in the position where that could be published information. We will work with Public Health Scotland to do that, yes. Okay.
Because the Auditor General, he had to resort to coming up with figures of his own, which he did. And if you look at paragraph 26, he tells us that it's cheaper to have someone in a care home than in hospital. So it would seem to me that if that's the case, then why aren't we properly funding care places in order to partly fix the problem?
So I think the Auditor General's figures are not out of line with the figures that we would internally use for our assessment of this. And you're right, we need to work with Public Health Scotland to get to the point of publishing this. And your question is really back to that tension across the system of how we release resource from one bit of the system in order to invest in another bit of the system. And that is really difficult when the bit of the system from which we need to release money is running as hot and under as much pressure as it is at the moment. And as we said, the initiatives that we're taking are around trying to demonstrate what is possible. So what is possible by reducing admissions, what is possible by reducing the length of stay. But actually, without very significant additional resources to invest, it's hard to actually create that headroom. We need to continue to do that. We need to continue to do that by demonstrating what can be achieved. But we also need to do that by some of the other reforms that we've set out in the service renewal framework around some of the things we need to look at across our hospital sector to achieve that.
Okay. I've just got one last question. I noticed there's a number of working groups and strategies around. You've mentioned the Collaborative Response and Assurance Group, CRAG. We've got the National Care Service Advisory Board. That's got a remit to provide advice and suggest where improvements could be made. There's the Health and Social Care Delayed Discharge and Hospital Occupancy Action Plan. I'm not sure how that's coming along. And then we've got the Rapid Peer Response and Support Team, who provide targeted support to IAs who are struggling with persistent delayed discharge pressures. So with all these committees and plans going on, I'm just wondering how effective do you think they're all being?
So maybe if I can just sort of take some of those in. All right, I'll try not to go through them all. So we've talked quite a lot about CRAG, and I think CRAG has that role in terms of it's chaired at a very senior level by ministers and by Councillor Kelly, and that is essentially looking at the data across all systems, I think on a fortnightly basis at the moment. The NCS Advisory Board, the difference with that is that it also includes people with lived experience, and that is focused, it's established a number of priorities, and it is focused on providing advice, and particularly with that lived experience lens on it. And I think that's really important because I think one of the things that we have to tackle in terms of people accelerating those discharge processes is a perception that hospital is the best place for somebody to be. And I think that sometimes we are still stuck with that idea in people's heads that that hospital is the best place for them to be in, yet all the evidence would demonstrate that actually a hospital is not the best place for you to be. And that's one of the challenges I think we have around thinking about the moves that we need to make. The Delayed Discharge and Hospital Occupancy Action Plan had three key areas of activity set out in it. One of those was around data, and I think we've largely addressed that because that was the bit that set up the whole systems pressure dashboard. That has now moved on. It was also around the things that we would expect every system to have in place, and a lot of that work has now been picked up by the Discharge Without Delay Collaborative, which is focusing on that small number of measures that I keep referring to, reducing admissions, reducing length of stay and improving discharge processes. And I'm slightly run out of steam there. Is there something I've missed there, Derek?
Yeah, that's right. Can I just go back, though, to one point? You gave a fairly clear commitment that you will be working with Public Health Scotland to produce that total cost data. The recommendation was that you should do that within the next 12 months. Will you meet that timetable?
So I think we just need to confirm that Public Health Scotland need, as the Statistics Authority, they need to be assured that they can access the appropriate quality of data to be able to do that. But I'm very happy to come back to the committee on that point. OK, that's fine. I'm now going to invite Joe Fitzpatrick to put some questions to you.
Thanks very much, Convener. I want to cover some of the areas where I think there's actually some really good practice across Scotland, and some of it you've talked about, so maybe to give you the opportunity to say a little bit more about that, how it's working in practice and how we're measuring the effects. So the first areas was about the work we're doing that effectively stops people going in to hospital in the first place. If they're not in hospital, they're not going to cause delayed discharge. So I guess if you think you touched on the frailty teams and obviously hospital at home, two areas where we're really focused on, we're expanding them. How are we doing with getting more beds at home? I've certainly had personal experience of the hospital at home system, and until you've been there, you can't imagine just how amazing it is. It's stopping somebody having to go into hospital in the first place. So how are we getting on with those things? And
so I'll maybe come to Derek on the detail of this, but I think it's important that we recognise the difference. So we've got hospital at home as a development, and hospital at home is the sort of high end. Essentially, hospital home is providing acute clinical services in people's homes and taking the equipment, the staff, whatever is needed. We've then got virtual beds, which is much more about that virtual monitoring. So that doesn't involve as much face-to-face contact, people going into homes, but it's absolutely monitoring people so that if there is a deterioration in their condition, then things can be triggered. Those two areas, along with the frailty units, have been key focuses for us through the operational performance improvement plan. And at this point, I'm going to ask Derek to say detail.
So maybe just starting with the hospital at home programme. So as you're aware, there is a commitment with an OI, the operational improvement plan, to have up to 2,000 beds by December. We are working with Public Health Scotland on the exact data collection because there are some challenges with that. But we know every system is now in the process of developing their hospital home pathways if they don't exist, or expanding them where they do. And that includes recruiting new staff. So two things are happening on hospital at home. First of all, the overall volume's increasing, but also the range of specialities. I mean, the older people pathway is well developed, and you may have had some experience of that, but we're now expanding into paediatrics and other specialities, which is potentially a real game changer. The programme has had some challenges because it does require a different model, but as you've alluded to, really strong evidence from hospital at home of highly effective patient outcomes for all the reasons we've said: less deconditioning, quicker response, less risk of infections, and a whole range of, and also the wider social benefits that just come from being at home and surrounded by your friends and family. So we're tracking progress of that. We don't have any published data, but we have management information that gives us strong confidence that we're on target. In terms of frailty units, so again, there's a commitment in the operational improvement plan. Every A&E now has access to frailty services, and now all boards are working towards an enhanced frailty service. And certainly we're highly confident that by the end of March that every mainland board will have access to an enhanced frailty service. And again, as Caroline's alluded to, really strong evidence of impact, reduce rates of admission for frail patients, but equally for those that are admitted, reduce length of stay, and again, for all the reasons that we've indicated, that delivers better patient outcomes.
Okay, thank you. The next area I was wanting to go on to was around delayed discharge and the variability across the country. So there's some really good practice. I'm going to highlight my local area, NHS Tayside, where like the members regularly get briefings, and when we had the briefing around, well, first of all, we were told off for calling it delayed discharge because, like, let's turn this on the head. It's discharge that should be planned discharge without delay. And we can see in Tayside all three integrated authorities in Tayside do better than other parts of the country because of that. The ethos, I think, of the way that they're taking things forward. There's obviously variability within Tayside, with Angus showing an amazing improvement over the space. Dundee consistently well, in Perth maybe not as good, but still better than the national average. How do we manage to make sure we get consistency of when we've got some best practice, which appears to be working in some areas, and you mentioned a couple of other areas as well, that we can make sure that that's picked up by integrated authorities and NHS boards across the country?
I think you're right to highlight Tayside, and it is no accident that Tayside also have the best performing A&E in the country as a result of all of those factors. And I think that whole question about how we take a good practice and spread it is both an opportunity but also a challenge, because I think we have to accept that the conditions in local areas can be quite different, and the systems and processes that they're docking into can be quite different as well. So it is not as straightforward as just lifting one bit of practice and being able to drop it in a different area. However, that said, there is a lot of learning, I think, to come out of the areas that are doing really well. Part of the way in which we try to do that is through CRAG, through having a regular sort of show and tell of where systems are seeing things shifting and making a difference. But I think probably importantly, the Discharge Without Delay collaborative, which brings together clinicians, multidisciplinary teams to really focus on those areas that we know make a difference, so avoiding admissions and reducing length of stay and having really good discharge processes. And that's been operating for about a year now, is that right?
It's slightly longer.
Slightly longer, okay, right. But I think that is a real, that whole collaborative approach, which has been used in other challenges as well, out with health and social care, I think is a real opportunity for people to come together, share experience, and translate that into their own local environment and local conditions.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. I think the collaborative now is engaging with the vast majority of partnerships, and it's a regular topic of discussion at CRAG. And as Caroline quite rightly said, there's ingredients that we know are really strong evidence-based work, but it needs to be tailored towards local circumstances. And importantly, local systems, local clinicians, local teams on the front line need to feel they can shape and own those in a way that operate within their individual context, because each system will be slightly different to others.
And we're managing to resource that collaboration work so that there's some funding to make sure that there's time. Time's one of the most challenging things, so time to collaborate.
Yeah, you're right. Time is one of the most challenging things, and I think so that's obviously very much for local partnerships to look at. But I would say that we have got some real champions of that approach across the system, who are sort of inspirational in their in what they bring to it.
Thanks, Joe. Right, I'm now going to turn finally to the Deputy Convener, Jamie Green, who's got some questions for you.
Hot off the press, I should add.
Of course.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Mr. Grieve. I just want to take us maybe a step back. I've listened very carefully to the lines of questioning, and thank you for your answers thus far. I think one of the things the report did do, in all fairness, is identify there's a lot of work going on across the country to try and tackle this problem. But I think we also have to be, quite realistic and quite honest with ourselves about the scale of the challenge. I guess my main problem is that we don't really seem to be budging on this at all. If you look back at 2015, there were 550,000 delayed discharge days. The then Health Secretary, Shona Robison, said, and I'm quoting her directly, "Over the course of this year, I want to eradicate delayed discharge out of the system." She said that on the 25th of February 2015, so that's almost a week anniversary, 11 years ago. What happened since then? The year after, it rose to 660,000 delayed discharge days. Last year, 720,000. It's going up and up and up. There's eradication and there's multiplication. Do we know what the figure will be this year?
So, I absolutely recognise that this is one of the most wicked problems across not just our system but across health systems across the UK as well. Every health system across the UK is challenged by the numbers of people who are in our hospitals who actually that's not the best place for them to be. And I think that we would all like to see that number substantially come down. I think that our understanding of what's impacting on those numbers has improved, and we do recognise, and we've discussed in this committee already, that there are a particular set of issues around adults with incapacity that means that they form quite a large chunk of our delays, and also, unfortunately for those individuals, they tend to be the people who are delayed the longest. We've also referred earlier to the fact that whilst there is a huge amount of work going on, and I said that in my opening statement, there is an enormous amount of work going on across systems, but that's not yet delivering the impact that we need to see to really make a step change in these. What we are doing is we're retaining a sort of bumpy, but what we call a stubbornly high level. So it's higher than we would want. But we are not seeing that multiplication factor. I think, in fact, if you go back to about 2021, we are remaining relatively stable, albeit at a much higher position than we would like. And I think that is a factor of all the work that has gone into this, but set against the challenges around demographics and around the challenges that we know about in terms of workforce and in terms of financial resource to support that workforce. So I'm not sitting here saying that I think that the level we're at is a good level to be at. It absolutely isn't. We cannot. Not just the impact that it has on those people who are delayed, but also the impact that it has on the way in which the whole of the system is able to operate. So we do need to continue. We need to continue to do all the things that we're doing. And again, as I've said already in this session, if there was a single magic bullet, I think we would have found it by now. This is about looking at multiple factors across the system and harnessing the creativity and the innovation of people in the system to understand what are the things that we can do to make a difference and focusing on those. And I suspect that we will need to continue to work very hard to maintain our position and at the same time looking at what are our options around digital, what are we learning from the virtual wards and hospital at home, what are we learning from the frailty units, and how can we scale up those sorts of activities in order to actually start to see a reduction.
Yeah, I mean, forgive me, does that sound a bit like, well, it's not getting any worse, but it's not getting any better either. So that's fine. I mean, I'm not talking about a blip here. This isn't a report which looks at a one-off year which is out of the ordinary. This is a repeated pattern over a decade since a promise was made to eradicate it. I mean, I question whether it's possible to eradicate delayed discharge at all. It's been sitting at around 3% of all discharges, affecting around 18,000 people consistently year on year on year for about the last 10 years. Is that just the base level we have to accept now?
So I would hate to think that that was the base level that we have to accept. And we do need to find ways of moving that down. Some of that will be about really being able to look at how we manage the adults with incapacity and making sure that they're not being delayed in the place that is most unsuitable to their needs. So there's work which involves legislation going on around that. But I think I agree with your analysis that it will be impossible to completely eradicate delays, because there will always be things that happen that mean that things aren't quite ready for people, or that people have very complex packages that take a bit longer to put in place. But what we really need to do is to make sure that we are eradicating those long delays and that we are doing everything else that we can to make sure that our processes work as effective as they can to get people out of hospital. And part of that as well is also people having that broader understanding of hospital not being the best place for people to be.
Thank you. I mean, in the last session we had with the Auditor General, we talked a little bit about this. Mr. Beattie picked up on it, this long-term issue that's just stubborn to deal with. And I guess what I've been trying to do some analysis on over the last week or so since that session is look at the previous reports that were out at the time. The 2005 report, which was called Moving On, an overview of delayed discharge. There was a 2016 report, Changing Models of Health and Social Care. There's been repeated Audit Scotland reports over the years. And I guess one thing that's never really been clear is, of all these reports, what lessons were learned? Because I feel a bit of déjà vu. If I'd gone back to the Public Audit Committee 10 years ago, they probably had the same conversation and probably had very similar answers from the DG Health at the time. And I just feel like we're going round in a bit of a circle. There's lots of jargon, there's lots of rhetoric, but the statistics themselves prove that virtually no progress has been made since these reports came out. And my biggest fear, I suppose, I pose to you, is that the next session of Parliament will be sitting in a year, 2, 3, 4, 5, having exactly the same conversation. Fill me with some confidence that the next Public Audit Committee and whoever sits on it won't need to have this conversation again.
So I would like to think you won't need to have this conversation again, but I think that there are some challenging issues for us, and actually it's not just for Scottish Government, it's not just for local systems. I think local governments still have a statutory responsibility for social care, and I think that it'd be interesting what COSLA would be saying to the committee in response to some of these questions as well, because this is about us working together, and this is about us ensuring that we are absolutely recognising the critical importance of social care. Yes, to the health and social care system, but actually to people being able to live good, productive lives and enjoy being with their families and in their communities. So I do think that there is more work that can be done in terms of where the priorities sit around social care and how that sits respective to other parts of the service. I've already spoken to you about the work that we've kicked off under the service renewal framework to look at how we can be more efficient in the acute sector, and that is absolutely with a very deliberate intention of being able to make some of those resource shifts that we have never managed to make in the past. But it is incumbent on every bit of this system to look to ensure that we are being as effective and as efficient as we possibly can, because those demographics aren't going to change, and we are running very fast at the moment just to keep up with those demographics. So we need to collectively find the ways in which we can make an absolute step change. I think that digital and technology will be part of that. Certainly back in 2005, there wasn't the ability to do the sort of remote monitoring and to have the virtual wards that we've set up. I think back in 2005, we also didn't have the investment in paramedics in the ambulance service and that peer-to-peer contact that has meant that the ambulance service is now only conveying around 50% of calls. We also didn't have the focus on flow navigation centres, again with that peer-to-peer contact and enabling people to stay further away from hospitals. And I think we also didn't have the same focus on multidisciplinary teams coming together to understand, particularly in the case of frail elderly people. And I've been in a number of the frailty units over the last few months, and I suppose the thing that struck me is the importance of the staff in the hospital understanding from the staff in the community what the baseline for an individual is, so understanding what we would normally expect in terms of their abilities, and therefore what that means in terms of when they're ready to be discharged home rather than being kept in hospital. So it's a multifaceted problem. It needs everybody to come together to resolve it.
Yes, I don't doubt there's any will or desire or good intention to come together to fix the problem, but I'm pretty sure, and it's not for me to put words in the mouth of COSLA, but if you ask them, is social care adequately funded, the answer would be a big fat no. We know that because those are the briefing documents they sent us a couple of weeks ago after the budget. So the answer to the question is social care properly funded? And if the answer to that is no, then you'll never resolve the issue of bed blocking, will you? So
I think that every bit of the public sector could make an argument about funding adequacy or otherwise, and actually we are working within a constrained financial envelope. So the way in which I try to turn that question is to say, OK, so are we confident that we're using all our money in the best way possible across the totality of the services that we're offering? And even looking at the likely costs around delayed discharges, that would demonstrate that there are some opportunities to shift resource and but importantly to shift activity out of the acute sector and towards funding that in social care and primary care. I am sure that there are opportunities for efficiencies and different ways of working across all of our public services, and the public services reform strategy sets out that ambition and the requirement, I think, and the responsibility that we all have to make sure that money that's being spent on behalf of the public purse is being used in the best way possible. So I do think there are opportunities there, and I think that we need to be careful that we're focusing not just on the adequacy of funding or otherwise, but how well we're using the funding, which is quite considerable, that we already have.
So, OK, I mean, let's rephrase that then. Who's not spending their money wisely? Which bit of the system? isn't being as productive.
I think that every bit of the system, in every bit of the system, you can identify opportunities for people to work differently together in a way that provides better.
Can you give an example?
So I think one of the examples that we would point at is the work that we're doing across NHS Scotland to develop single approaches to business systems that will provide us with better intelligence and information, take some of the manual labour out of some of those processes. Another example I would point to is in the subnational arrangements where we're looking at a single plan for orthopaedics across Scotland. So looking at how we best use the capacity that we have across Scotland to manage the demand from within Scotland. So I think there are examples out there. We need to focus on how we deliver against those and implement some of those plans.
You're obviously Director General for Health and Social Care, and I appreciate you're not in charge of local government or its budget, although I presume you do have some influence over the working of integrated joint boards and the role that they play in delivering social care and how that links into the wider health and social care budget, which is essentially a unified budget. What would you like to see happen? I appreciate it's difficult to give analysis when you're the person in charge of it, but you must know why people are stuck in hospital. You must know the main reasons why you can't get people out of hospital beds and into another setting outside of that building. There must be analysis of what are the main reasons for that, and you'll know what the sticking points are. What are they, and how are you going to go about fixing them?
So I think that it is clear that part of the reason that people get stuck in hospital beds and the longest delays that we see are around the issues around adults within capacity. That's going to require legislation to fix some of that, but if we could start to see improvements on that, that could absolutely bring down not just the absolute numbers of people delayed, but also that cost in total bed days to the system, because there are so many of our long delays fall into that categories. A lot of our other delays can be relatively short term, but I think as we look at the demographics and the increasing elderly population, we also need to continue to focus on the things that will prevent people from needing to come into hospital at the moment, in the first place. So at the moment, our focus on that is very much around additional investment in general practice to do that preventative work, but also the initiative we talked around the frailty units, hospital at home, virtual beds. All of those things are important in terms of shifting that balance. They're all about caring for people in the community rather than caring for people in the acute base. So I think we need to continue to make progress in all those areas whilst looking at the things that we can do through digital and technology to improve our overall efficiency as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very helpful actually. On the issue of incapacity, just to clarify, is that these are people who are medically fit to leave hospital but do not have the otherwise capacity to look after themselves once discharged, or is it if they were sent home they wouldn't be able to look after themselves, therefore they're safer in a hospital? So
the issue there is about people who don't have the capacity to make the decision around moving from, so they're in a hospital at the moment and because they have Alzheimer's, learning difficulties, whatever it is, they don't have the capacity to actually make the decision either to go back home potentially with care packages or into another form of care that would be more suitable for them. And unless there is already a power of attorney in place that enables their families to make that decision, then there is quite a complex legal process involved around the local authorities having to get guardianship orders.
And all the while they're stuck.
And all the while they're stuck,
yeah.
Yes.
No. Okay, that's very clearly an issue, and that clearly is a cohort of people who are stuck for quite a long time, sometimes months. Yes. We've heard some horrible anecdotes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's clearly one area that there could be improvement for sure. Just on some of the data, we talked a little bit, I think Mr Simpson talked about the £440 million number that's in the report. That was just 1 year. But I presume that was a very primitive calculation based on number of bed days and the cost per day per bed, which I think is around £618 per day or around that level. So it's a very simple way of looking at it. There clearly must be a better way of measuring the cost of this. Do you have a number?
So I'm not sure. The Auditor Scotland, the Auditor General sitting behind me, so I'm not sure I'm going to describe that as a simple calculation. But what I've already said to the committee is that we do make our own internal assessment, and it's pretty much in line with that assessment. The Auditor General has drawn on the same data that we have in order to produce that. I think we do need to, and I've already accepted that we need to work with Public Health Scotland around getting that information to a quality standard where it can be published and made available. I think that would be really helpful for the whole of the system.
How many staff hours are lost to managing patients who are medically fit to leave hospital but have to be cared for in a hospital environment?
So I don't have that figure. At any one time, boards will be able to tell you how, obviously how many beds and how many wards that. I think we just need to be careful to assume that if those beds weren't being occupied by people who don't have a clinical need to be in those beds, then they would immediately be, we wouldn't need to staff them any longer, because obviously there are other pressures. We've got pressures coming through the front door in A&E of people who do need to be admitted. And one of our challenges around ambulance drop-offs and around the long waits in our A&E departments are not having beds available. So I think the first call on those beds would be on improving flow through our A&E, but also there are occasions when it's limitations on the number of beds, particularly when the hospitals are very busy, has an impact on planned care as well, and it would certainly make it simple. So I don't think we would be moving to not staff those beds. I think we would be first of all looking at how we would be able to use them differently to improve performance across the whole system.
I wasn't suggesting you don't staff the beds, but the beds have been occupied by someone who doesn't need to be in the bed. That's the point I'm making.
Yeah.
And the analysis around how many clinical or non-clinical hours are taken up by looking after those patients, because essentially once someone's left the door of the hospital, it's someone else's problem, it's someone else's care duty. That member of clinical staff is automatically immediately freed up to then look after someone else in that bed or otherwise. But that piece of work's never been done, that analysis?
I'll come back to the committee on that, but I'm not aware that we've... So the work that has been done previously have been about cost, and obviously that includes the cost of the staffing element of that. So we can look to see if the work that was done previously, if that breaks down that staffing element.
Okay. My final question is, has the Scottish Government or the NHS done any holistic analysis on increased mortality rates as a result of delayed discharge, or indeed additional harm caused to patients as a result of delayed discharge? And if the answer to that is no, why not?
So in all the statements that I make about it being hospital not being the best place for people to be, that draws on evidence from research, not just from the NHS, but from a number of different sources. I can come back to the committee with details on some of the research reports that indicate that impact on people who are delayed.
Yeah, statistical data would be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you. And just picking up on that final question, one of the striking things in the briefing on community health and social care performance is Exhibit 4, which is at the end of the report, which talks about the importance of, or the impact of there being inequalities, the importance of reducing inequalities. And it makes the very clear point that there is a huge gap in life expectancy within Scotland between the most deprived and the least deprived areas, male and female. It talks about the relationship between deprivation and the frequency with which day beds are used. It talks about premature mortality in areas where there is dense population, and talks about, to Mr Simpson's reading out of that letter, to the higher rates of unpaid care in some of the most deprived communities. So there are some fundamental structural issues, social and economic, out there, aren't there, which is probably not just solely your responsibility to challenge and to remedy, Caroline Lamb. But do you, in your position, take a view on those things, and what is the government doing to try and address those huge inequalities which exist? Yeah,
I'm acutely aware that the drivers of poor health or good health are around 80%. I think Michael Marmot would argue 80% influenced by factors that have got nothing to do with what the health and social care system is doing. And the population health framework is very much a sort of cross-sector, cross-society approach to tackling some of those issues. In terms of what the government's doing, I think the single thing I would probably point to as being most important is around the Child Poverty Action Plan, because we know that the impact of poverty and adverse events on early childhood are one of the things that have the most long-lasting impact on your life chances, on your educational prospects, on your health prospects, whether you are involved with the justice system, all of that. And therefore, actually, that really is root cause prevention, getting into tackling some of the things that mean that some of our children are so very disadvantaged and more likely to experience health inequalities through their lives.
Yeah, thank you. Before we finish up, Graham Simpson's got a quick follow-up on that area.
It's not quite a follow-up, convener. I just recall the last time you were in front of the committee, you'd been criticised for not visiting hospitals, and I asked you about that. But you've told us today that you have, in the past few months, visited a number of frailty units. So I just wonder, now you've been out and about and you're seeing firsthand the problems on the ground, whether that's been useful to you in your job, this new approach of getting out of the office.
So thank you for that question. Getting out and about has always been one of the key elements of my job, and one of the things that actually I enjoy more than anything else that I do in this job, but also one of the, because it is inspirational being out and having the opportunity to talk to staff. And certainly being out and actually seeing what's going on in the frailty units gives a flavour to some of the things that I read, and that's the same for everything else. I was in a number of hospitals looking at what they're doing around improving productivity in planned care. And yeah, you have asked me this question before, and I thought you might ask me again. So I guess there's if you look at my record of being out and about, there was a step change in the number of engagements that I had out of the office, as the convener put it, between July 24 and July 25. And I'm already on record as saying to this committee that the reason for that was partly around the fact that in that period I gave evidence 4 times to the UK COVID inquiry, and anybody who's been involved in that will appreciate just how time-intensive the preparation for that is. But the reason why I was wondering whether you'd ask me this question, because it also gives me the opportunity to put on record another factor that influenced what I was doing during that time, and that is that in June 24, my father became very unwell, and it became clear that he and my mother, who he supported her because she had Alzheimer's, were no longer going to be able to carry on living independently in Yorkshire. So in July 24, we moved them up to be in Edinburgh to be close to me, because my brother lives in France. Unfortunately, my father died early September, and my mother then passed away in June 25. And during that period, I took the decision that I needed to spend as much time as possible being able to visit my parents in the evening, and that's one of the things that impacted on my ability to get back. So I probably would have found it hard to talk about that the last time we met, but I'm grateful to have the opportunity now to put that on the record. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you felt able to share that. You don't have to share these very, very personal things, but you've put on the record. And I think you spoke very well earlier about your experience of visiting the frailty units, and you've told us how useful that's been. So we'll leave the personal stuff, but at least you've had the chance to put it on the record.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much for that and for the evidence that you've given us this morning. Caroline Lamb, Derek Grieve, can I thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. I think when I look at the diary that the committee has got, I don't know about your diary, Director General, but we've got you booked into to come back to see us in a couple of weeks' time. So it'll be the final session of this parliamentary session with us, but we look forward to that as well. And if you've got any things you want to follow up in writing following this morning's session, please do that. We would welcome anything that you wish to share with us. And on that note, Derek Grieve, Caroline Lamb, can I thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to suspend the meeting to allow for a changeover of witnesses.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, can I welcome everyone back to the Public Audit Committee's meeting this morning. We've had a break for a changeover of witnesses, and so I'm now very pleased to welcome to the committee to aid us in our consideration of the Section 22 report that was recently published into the Scottish Public Pensions Agency for the financial year 2024-25. I'm very pleased to welcome the Auditor General, Stephen Boyle, Morning Auditor General, and alongside the Auditor General this morning is Michael Oliphant, who is an Audit Director at Audit Scotland, and Stuart Nugent, who is a Senior Audit Manager at Audit Scotland. Can I invite you, Auditor General, to begin this session with a short opening statement, after which we'll put some of our questions to you and to Michael and Stuart.
Well, many thanks, Convener, and of course good morning to the committee. As you mentioned, Convener, I'm presenting this morning a Section 22 report on the 2024-25 audit of the Scottish Public Pensions Agency, and I do so under Section 22 of the Public Finance and Accountability Scotland Act 2000. My report brings to the committee's attention issues relating to the SPPA's performance in discharging its responsibilities in relation to the 2015 pensions remedy, as well as some wider concerns about the agency's governance and transparency. Following the 2018, what's known as the MacLeod judgment on age discrimination within the UK's 2015 pension reforms, the SPPA, as a public pensions administrator, has a legal responsibility for delivering pensions remedy calculations to members of the 4 public pension schemes that it administers, being the NHS in Scotland, police, firefighters and Scottish teachers' pension schemes. This included presenting all eligible scheme members with a choice, and that choice is about the different options for benefits that they will receive. And there was a statutory deadline for the SPPA to do so, along with other UK pension authorities, of the 1st of April 2025. The SPPA did not meet this deadline. In the auditor's view, it underestimated the scale and complexity of the work involved in calculating the options across each of its 4 schemes, and it's now working towards revised deadlines through to the 31st of July 2028, over 3 years late to fulfil its obligations. The legislation allows for some flexibility in timescales, but progress remains slow. And as of November 2025, the SPPA has issued choices to 55% of scheme members out of a total eligible population of just under 200,000. This includes active and deferred members as well as those in retirement. Delays, of course, mean that some retired scheme members may not be receiving their full pension entitlement. It's our view that overall, the SPPA has not yet demonstrated sufficient transparency regarding its progress on remedy. And as I mentioned, Convener, the auditor has also reported some concerns about the governance and transparency within the agency. Michael and Stuart will continue to monitor developments and progress during their annual audit, especially progress with remedy, and I'll take a view whether there should be any further public reporting to the committee upon receipt of their next annual audit report. And as you mentioned, Convener, between the 3 of us, we're very happy to answer any questions the committee has on the report.
Thank you very much indeed, and thanks for that outline of a little bit of the history of this. You mentioned transparency at the very start there, and it just strikes me as being of interest that there is such a variation in the level of outturn results, assessments made according to different occupational pension schemes within the public sector. So, for example, in your report you highlight that 85% of retired police scheme members have received their assessment, but 0% of firefighters have received their assessment. Why is there such a big variation between 2 groups of workers in that way?
So you're right, Convener. I may just refer the committee to Exhibit 1 in today's Section 22 report that sets out some of the different category of members of pension schemes in progress towards remedy calculations across the different schemes. I'll maybe bring Michael in a moment to kind of set out some of the specifics between why are police and fire so different. But in terms of some of the other schemes, and I think the SPPA, Accountable Officer and Chief Executive, has given some parliamentary evidence along with his colleagues on this to the Finance and Public Administration Committee towards the end of last year. And some of that's really relevant. So there are, for police especially, there is one employer in Scotland now. It's also the same for fire, actually, so I think it's an important point to come back to. But for some of the other schemes, looking at teachers, not just local authority employers, but also some other employers too. But within the NHS, there are over 800 employers. I think the point being, whilst there is a difference in scale of employers in the NHS and police, I don't think that tells the whole story. Because, of course, this won't have been a new development for a pension scheme to know that there are 800. But it does bring into focus, I think, some of the historical issues within the Scottish Public Pensions Agency. This is not the first Section 22 report that has been produced. It's the first in a number of years, I think, in this session of Parliament. But my predecessor prepared Section 22 reports on the progress of the implementation of IT systems within the agency. And some of that context is still relevant today. What I think the Chief Executive has recognised in his evidence to Parliament, there's been an underinvestment in both IT within the agency and on effective data management arrangements. And that data management arrangements, I think, is so fundamental of why they've not been able to make progress consistently, Convener. Transparency around that, to address your second point, really matters. Because ultimately, this is people who are retired, who may not be receiving their full pension entitlement. I think the agency, in our view, whilst dealing with the scale of complexity that it has, and they are not the only pension provider in the UK that is struggling to meet these deadlines, but we think there's been optimism bias within their communication to members that needs to be much clearer about what members can expect to receive and when. There's considerable work to do. This is the final point I'd make before passing to Michael. I said in my opening statement, 2028 is really the revised deadline. There's scale and complexity to go through individual calculations for all of these remaining members, but also for a need for the agency, as it's currently doing, of taking stock about what technology and what data management arrangements does it now need to put in place alongside addressing remedy. I will turn to Michael, Convener, I think, to address the point about police and fire differentials.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. Yes, Auditor General said, so with the police data, it's one employer. With fire, it's one employer. With NHS, it's approximately 800 employers that are dealing with data. So the agency will point to better data with police, cleaner data. They don't have to spend so much time getting into the format they need for the system. And all the police data is held within the pension administration system. That's not quite the case with the other ones. The difference, I think, between police and fire is there was some work was required on fire data in relation to pay differentials, acting up allowances and so on before it could be used. I think also that a key part of this is the police, going back for the year to October 2024, of all the FOI requests that the agency received relating to remedy, 87% were from police scheme members. So I think there's a weight of voice within the police scheme as well, which may have played a factor in this or not, but I can't say.
Okay, that's interesting, and I think we're going to get the accountable officer from the agency in to see us in a couple of weeks' time. So these are some of the things we can put to him. You mentioned again in your opening statement that this is about a legal responsibility which the Scottish Public Pensions Agency has got. I suppose that begs the question: are there any financial consequences for them if the remedy is not addressed properly and on time?
So yes, I'll bring colleagues in just to some of the specifics on this, but there is if a member of the scheme has been underpaid, they will receive the differential plus interest, and that interest rate, I think, check with colleagues, is 8% set by UK government for recognising the recourse that a member should have received. So these pension schemes, convener, unlike the local government pension scheme, they're not asset-backed schemes. So they are effectively what in jargon terms known as a pay-as-you-go pension scheme that will be met on an annual basis through funding provided to meet the pension scheme's obligations through the Scottish budget. So I think I'll turn to Michael just to supplement to that.
8% is the accrued interest rate that's applied to these. It's funded by the UK government, so the recent estimate is that it will cost the UK government £1.7 billion in relation to remedy payments for Scotland. I think that's in a UK context of £19 billion. There are obviously administration costs for the pensions agency, and they've estimated at around £20 million for the remedy period, so over a number, 3 or 4 years or so, that it will cost the agency in administering this.
I wonder if it's worth actually just touching on some of the financial implications to the agency, because Michael's quite right that maybe Michael say a bit more about the additional resources that the agency has had to request from the Scottish Government to, well, first of all, to continue business as usual activity, but also to go through remedy calculations. And I think the Chief Executive set out some of that detail to the Finance and Public Administration Committee. Part of it, convener, is, I think, as he noted, it can take up to a year to train a member of staff to allow them to go through the most complex calculations. And as I mentioned a moment or two ago, these are individual calculations for the members that need to go through. So there's been a significant injection of additional resource into the agency to allow them to work through these calculations. What I think, though, alongside that, is what does it mean for the future provision and that work on digital and data management that will be so key for the future quality of provision to those affected by remedy, but also their other members too. But again, Michael might want to say a bit more about that.
Yeah, in terms of additional staff, they've recruited 100, so they've got a core establishment of about 300 staff. They've had to recruit an additional 100 on that in temporary contracts to help with the remedy process and issuing remedial service statements. As Auditor General says, it takes around a year to recruit and train them up. What happens is, I think the new recruits will go on to deliver the business as usual stuff, allowing capacity to be freed up from staff that are more experienced, greater technical knowledge, to be involved in the more complex remedy cases.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Can I go back, though, to my originating question here, which is, so this all stems from the MacLeod judgment, which was a court case where the UK government was challenged under age discrimination laws. But my question was, could the Scottish Public Pensions Agency be sued by people, I don't know, in the small claims court or in another arena, because they have failed to meet their legal responsibilities to make these assessments and then to give people any back pension pay that they're due?
So I don't know is the answer.
Okay.
Convener. I don't know if there's a definitive legal position that the Scottish Government or the agency has adopted in that respect. I think our understanding is that the provision of accrued interest that Michael mentions is the position around remedy that's on offer. However, of course, it may be that that's a decision individual members or groups of members may wish to take, and it's perhaps, rather than me giving a view I'm not fully sighted on, one for the agency to share with the committee if they have any insight or experience on that. But again, I'll pause just if anybody has any further position on it.
I think in relation to the timescales that were set, the agency will point to the section of the Act, paragraph 10 of our report. The relevant date in which they have to meet can be such later as the scheme manager considers reasonable in all circumstances in the case of a particular member or a particular class of member. So although they didn't make the original timescales, the agency have viewed that there's part of the legislation allows them to move the timescales. What the Act is silent on is whether they can repeat doing that. We've queried this with the agency, but also asked the pensions regulator about this. We haven't had a conclusive answer from the regulator yet, but we understand that, so we're not aware of anything that would suggest that the pensions regulator isn't content with actions that the agency have taken, and the agency has been discussing with the regulator before taking this action, but we haven't had that direct confirmation from the regulator as to what their view is.
Okay, but it does then become, doesn't it, a test of reasonableness and whether the action they're taking is reasonable or not?
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. And Michael quite rightly mentioned the role that the pensions regulator plays here, who is, so the SPPA is a regulated entity and subject to engagement and communication with the pensions regulator. So I suppose that their view on the reasonableness of the SPPA will be instructive as to whether or not that leads to any individual issues or concerns or any potential legal action. But I think it's clear that the SPPA's regulatory engagement, we don't think is out of the ordinary from that of the steps that other pensions agencies across the UK are taking in terms of progress. What our view was, though, that this complexity would be better served with more transparency in terms of their ability to meet what is a complex process.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to move us on and invite Colin Beattie to put some questions to you. Colin.
Thank you, Vera. General, you briefly touched on, during your opening remarks, about the impact on individuals. And while the bulk of the report is more about process and so on, it really is important to remember there are people behind this and suffering from this. Now, I've had a few complaints, as you might expect, and I'd like to just highlight a couple of them. One is a constituent with cancer who is taking early retirement for obvious reasons. They need to adjust their mortgage deal, which can only happen if they receive an updated pension projection. They were advised it would take quite a few months to achieve that. They were extremely concerned they were at risk of losing their home. Hardly a good position to be in when you're suffering from cancer. This one's been resolved. Another one is someone retiring after 36 years of service. Since July 2025, they've been waiting for what they refer to as a quote from Capita. They've received no pension payments. They are suffering financial hardship, stress, anxiety, and again, they're fearful that the lack of financial resources that they've now got may make them homeless because they won't be able to keep up the payments in their house. That one's still outstanding. So there are serious issues behind this that are affecting individuals. It's not just people who already have pensions waiting to see if they're going to get an adjustment or the option for an adjustment. People are actually being affected day by day. And what I'm concerned about is whether there's anything in place other than them coming to an MSP or whatever, because a lot of people just don't do that.
So the examples you give, Mr. Beattie, are clearly very serious ones, but I wonder if I can ask a clarification point. If those are cases that are being directly administered by the Scottish Public Pensions Agency, the committee may be familiar that the UK Civil Service Scheme, which is administered by the UK Government along with their provider. And the reason I'm asking that is because you mentioned Capita. Capita is the partner of the UK Civil Service Pension Scheme, and there are very live and currently documented concerns about the issues within that pension scheme, to the extent that there was a joint statement from the UK Government and Capita in the past fortnight or so that acknowledged the scale of the issues and the extent that the UK Government would be providing hardship payments to those members who haven't been receiving pensions. They're coming up. So I don't dispute the fact that the example you gave, particularly the first example you gave, that may be for the Scottish Pensions Public Agency, but I wouldn't want to, I suppose, leave the committee with the impression that the SPPA is not making pension payments. They are making pension payments, but I think the example in our report today is that it may not be the right pension amount that's being paid. So forgive me for asking a clarification.
Case one was certainly SPPA because we had a response from them. And as I say, that one was resolved. The second one, they refer to SPPA, and I don't have the full letter here in front of me, just a few of the brief highlights. So there's certainly a belief on the constituents' part that it's SPPA. That will come out, obviously, in the response, which, as I say, I haven't received yet.
Thank you. What I might do is ask colleagues, I think there's two parts to effectively the performance and the opportunities and risks within the SPPA. One is addressing remedy, but the other is the impact that that's having on business as usual. So, such as providing annual benefit statements, and I think as Michael mentions, and maybe turn to him again actually just to come in with a bit more detail about what it means for the organisation's performance in the round, because for many people who are approaching retirement, some will be affected by remedy and others won't, that they will need information for life events, whether it's remortgage or in the unfortunate example you gave where people are ill. The SPP are probably best placed to come back with some of the detail on it, but what we can maybe do is just say a little bit more about how that's affecting business as usual as we understand it.
And just on the point about pension payments, so the SPPA, the scheme members are continuing to receive payments, but they may not be on the most beneficial. The agency has estimated that 70% of affected members are on the correct pension. They might not know that yet, but until they get their calculations and make their choice. But that also means 30% are not on the correct benefit. Obviously, that creates a lot of uncertainty in financial planning, as you highlight, Mr. Beattie. Potential stress associated with that. There could be tax implications as well, historic, that need addressed as part of these. That's part of the reason why it is such a complex issue. And in terms of the impact of business as usual, the agency has a poor performance in issuing annual benefits statements, which is obviously part of the remedial service statements that need to be given out in the case of remedy. But also they have to correct some historical errors that have been identified as the Government's Actuaries Department has looked at some of the remedy calculations in terms of providing that assurance, and it's revealed some historic errors, albeit some minor ones, but nevertheless the agency has a responsibility to correct them. The agency overall, we mentioned some of the data problems, but also it relies heavily on manual processing. They've got a pensions administration system that's, I think it's over 20 years old now. So it relies heavily on manual processing, which can obviously introduce errors as part of that. it's part of the longer-term ambition of the agencies to move to what they term digitising the retirement journey. But they're unable to make sufficient progress with that, while they're obviously having to deal with remedy, sort that out, correct the backlog, and before they can move forward to something that's a lot more automated, it's a lot more digital. They're hoping to procure a new system by 2028, so hopefully that will reduce, indeed potentially eliminate manual processing. And I guess with that, they would be looking at reducing the staff numbers that they need back down to core levels that they would normally expect.
Just moving on to the sort of timescales involved in all this. Paragraph 9 reports that the SPPA didn't meet its 1st April 2025 legislative deadline. This is for providing the affected members with remedy calculations and options. Paragraph 10 states, following guidance from TPR, the agency provided breach of law reports for the affected cohorts in May and June 2025. Can you give us a bit of background as to what a breach of law report is and what sort of consequences, if any, they have?
Yeah, I'll ask Michael to pick up.
It was a standard report that the pensions regulator requests of scheme administrators if they are in breach of legislation in any part in relation to pensions regulations. So the agency issued these on the 22nd of May and 2nd of June to move the timescales for police out to 31st of August 2025. And the same for NHS and teachers. As part of issuing a breach of law report, they're supposed to outline what is the realistic timescale for achieving it. But the pensions regulator expects that there's a clear and realistic plan to ensure that accurate, in this case, remedial service statements are issued as soon as possible. They also expect engagement with the pension board, and that affected members are informed of the new date. If expectations are not met, if the pensions regulator's expectations are not met, then they may investigate further, or indeed they might consider using their statutory powers, which would be a form of special measures. But they haven't done this in this case.
So, as far as SPPA is concerned at this point, there's really been no consequences to them other than the formal issuing of the breach of law?
There's been no penalties applied or any action that we're aware of that the pensions regulator has implemented.
Okay. The report also says that the pensions regulator, in correspondence with SPPA, acknowledged in correspondence with the pensions regulator, SPPA acknowledged that the previous extended dates were ambitious. Did the SPPA give any explanation as to why these dates had been set or why they were ambitious?
I think that perhaps speaks to one of the overall conclusions we make in the report, that the original assumption, expectation of delivery by 2025 was overly ambitious. With the appointment of a new chief executive, I think what we've now seen is a better understanding of the scale and complexity of the issues being faced by the agency to deliver remedy statements. And I think probably speaks to some of the evidence that was given to the Finance Public Administration Committee in December of last year, that better set out why it's been such a harder, more difficult process than they expected. That having to go through line-by-line calculations for individual cases. As Exhibit 1 sets out some of the progress that's been made, especially for former police officers or members of the police pension scheme. I think that realistic projection needs to continue, Mr. Beattie, especially, arguably, having gone through some of the the cleaner data for police retired members now still having to go through, especially NHS and teachers, will inevitably be complicated too. So the timescales and the consistency of communication needs to be transparent, avoiding optimism bias, clear, transparent communication in order to meet, whether it's deadlines of end of 2027 or indeed, as we mentioned in paragraph 13 of the report, potentially into 2028 for some of the NHS calculations. There's a lot of work still to do, and it matters that that's communicated clearly to individual members and to scheme members across the piece.
Have you had the opportunity to see the assumptions behind the original estimates? The estimate in terms of time. I mean, did they seem reasonable at that time?
So it's not something that we've looked at. I think, as the Auditor General mentioned, when the new Chief Executive was appointed in June 2024, he made some changes around governance, but I think by his own admission to the Finance and Public Administration Committee in December, it took a while before he realised the scale and complexity of the challenges. But during that time, the agency had employed contractors to oversee the project, but also they sought assurance from the Scottish Government in the form of the Digital Assurance Office, providing them with health checks. And during the course of 2024, they provided an AMBER assessment. They provided an AMBER assessment on the project in September 2023. AMBER, again, when it was reported to the Audit Committee in January 2024, it moved to an AMBER Green assessment in March 2024, saying that they'd found an improving position and found strong project leadership in place. Tied with that, you had the agency's risk registers, which had the remedy project at a score of 100 out of a maximum of 250. It wasn't until the latter part of 2024 that, through a review of the governance papers, that you actually saw the remedy risks really coming to light in terms of what was being provided to the governance groups. The risk register put the score at 250, the highest it can be. So it wasn't until the turn of 2024 into 2025 that really the risks to the original timescale became apparent.
I would really just add briefly. I think also it's fair to say that some of the legislation and guidance to pension schemes wasn't provided on time to support some of the remedy calculations. The agency found data quality issues as it progressed, the complexity of the calculations they were working towards, as well as some of the, I think as they noted in the FPAC evidence, Mr Beattie, that the ill health retirement assessments were also delayed as they worked through it. So I think as they embarked upon it, probably set by UK government deadlines of 2025, the SPP is not the only provider that is and was unable to meet that deadline. I think what they now have is a much better understanding of the complexity of the issues that they are working through. What matters, though, is that the revised deadlines that are set are realistic. Because for all the reasons that I think you mentioned in your original question, it's individual pensioners who may or may not be receiving the right pension amount, and getting systems, process, and just be clear, people's expectations can be managed effectively.
In paragraph 12, it also talks about SPPA writing to the Scottish Government with a progress update and a request for additional funds over the medium term to deliver the remedy. and it goes on to give a few bullet points which deals with worst case scenarios and so on, which mean that, really worst case, it could be 2030 before this is resolved. Can you tell us the amount of additional funds that the SPPA requested from the Scottish Government in September 25, and what did they get? What was approved, and was it the full amount that was received?
Of course, Michael.
So, following that request, I think the figure they were looking for was about 1.8 million budget pressure, which was, I believe, found through offsetting savings with the corporate portfolio.
So they received the full...
My understanding, yeah, they received what they had asked for.
We know that for sure?
Yeah.
You do? Okay. Your report also says that the SPPA wrote to the pension regulator in October 25 to advise of further delays, and at the time of the audit, the regulator had not provided a view on the SPPA's actions or the deadline extensions. Do you know if he's now provided a review, and if not, is there an expected timescale?
So we've not heard from the pensions regulator in terms of their view. We have asked, or maybe ask Stuart to comment on the recent dialogue we've had with them.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So yeah, we've written to the pension regulator several months ago, and we've been in ongoing dialogue about the legal background to our query. Given that we are a Scottish, we're looking at a Scottish situation, and that is an organisation that exists outside of Scotland. So we're currently considering the latest communication we've received from the pension regulator, but we've not yet had a view from the pension regulator on the action taken by SPPA.
Do I understand from what you say that the pension regulator has a problem dealing with yourselves as a Scottish entity?
I wouldn't say that. I think we're just trying to clarify the basis of our. The pension regulator is trying to clarify the basis of our information request, and we've not yet reached a point where they are satisfied with what we've provided to them.
It's fairly well established arrangements for external auditors of pension schemes, pension authorities, to communicate with the pensions regulator. So I wouldn't read into it that there's any concern or from our part. I think we're just waiting for clarification to our query.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to turn to Joe Fitzpatrick to put some questions to you. Joe.
Yeah, I think some of the questions I was specifically going to ask have actually been answered in other questions, but I wonder if I could follow on from Colin Beattie's questions about the implications for individual members. So, are you able to give us an idea of the scale of what being on the wrong benefit could mean for an individual, just so as we can understand how that could impact on someone's life, either when someone that's already retired or someone that's looking to retire but been given the wrong either pension or estimates?
Sorry,
I was just going to say, I don't think we've got that information at a specific case level, so I don't think we'd know, how much they are not getting that they're entitled to, or indeed in the small number of cases where they might have to pay money back. Over the course of their, pension life, if you like, we're looking at the timescale between 2015 and 2022 in terms of that discriminatory period being applied. So it'll be a smaller element over someone's career, but equally it could be financially significant. But without knowing the detail, as I said earlier, the stress that has on individuals of not knowing whether they're on the correct benefit or not, irrespective of whether they are entitled to additional funds or not.
And so the individuals who are potentially impacted, will they know that they're potentially impacted here? Will they know that there's a question mark over whether they're getting the right amount or not?
Yes, they should. Back in 2020, the latter part of 2023, the agency wrote out to all affected members to say that they would be, their calculations would be reviewed as part of this.
And we're confident that part of the transparency of the process has been successful.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Of course, it matters that people are informed, but I guess the next what people really want to know is, what does that mean for me personally? You know, am I being underpaid? And then people think, well, I'm not getting paid what I'm entitled to. I worked however many years in public service. I should be receiving the pension that I am due. Or as Michael mentions, perhaps more distressingly, that people are being overpaid pension and sat with a liability. So clearly, I think the point we're trying to convey in the report is this is a complex process, and the SPP are not alone in working through it. But to be clearer, people's expectations can be managed. And as I mentioned, Mr Fitzpatrick, to the convener earlier, what we're seeing, I think, in the report is good progress on police pensions, but considerable work still remaining on fire, teachers and the NHS.
So I think earlier you mentioned that 8% would be that if someone was underpaid, they would be compensated by 8%. So that seems fair. Slightly concerned about now what's the opposite. You hadn't actually considered somebody being overpaid and then having to pay back. Would they have to pay back, and would they have to pay back out with interest, or what's the situation for somebody in that?
It would depend on the individual circumstances, on when the time period involved, whether there was interest to be applied to that. I'm not entirely sure. There's a small number of cases that will result in a case where an individual has been overpaid. I don't know if Stuart, if it... No.
Yeah, I think it was discussed at the Finance and Public Administration Committee. I think it was to do with a tapered relief, and I think it was a very small number that they thought might have been overpaid. I think they quoted a number of 30. So yeah, we don't have full sight on that, but that's as much as we know.
But would they be expected to pay that back?
I don't know.
You think? So my understanding is they would be expected to pay that back, yes. But I don't know the terms on which they would have to pay it back. It might be over an extended period of time as opposed to just a lump sum.
So obviously the UK government have set the 8% for if someone's underpaid. Have they also set a percentage for if someone's overpaid?
I'm not too sure if that applies to that. We can check and come back to the committee.
That'd be helpful. Thanks very much. Thanks, Convener.
Thanks very much indeed. I'm now going to turn to Graham Simpson to put some questions to you. Graham.
Yeah, thanks. A bit like Joe Fitzpatrick, a lot of what I was going to ask has been covered. But I guess just to pick up on that point, because I think it's a serious point of people being overpaid. And even though it might be a small number, it might be significant amounts that they've been overpaid. And I was just reflecting that throughout this period, there will be a number of people who have passed away and who may have been getting, or not been getting enough, or been getting too much. What is happening in those cases?
In those cases, it's the beneficiaries of their payment that will make that choice in terms of the remedial service statement that they'll get. So it passes on to those that would have benefited from it in the case of a deceased member.
So do we know if that's been going on? I mean, you can imagine, just imagine you're there, you're sitting there, you're a widow or a widower, and unbeknown to you, your partner has not been getting enough pension. Suddenly you get a letter saying, either we owe you this or you owe us that. Has that been happening?
So yes, and it's one of the priority categories that the agency has been given. So ill health assessment has been one, beneficiaries of deceased members, been another in terms of the priority that they're trying to give this, and amongst the various complexities with the calculations that they have to do.
Any idea of the numbers involved?
No.
No.
We can certainly check our records on that, but I think it may be something that the Chief Executive covered in his evidence to the Finance Public Administration Committee of the scale of numbers. But I think it illustrates the importance of safe progress in this, because as you point out, the many retired members, especially I think given the nature of the schemes that the SPPA administers, they will want to be satisfied that they can progress as quickly as possible and reassure families that they are providing members or their beneficiaries with the correct level of pension.
Okay. You mentioned earlier, I think it was you, Michael, that mentioned the reliance on manual processes, which seems a bit bizarre in this day and age. I mean, I know it was, in the pension sector, it used to be normal practice that you'd have someone would sit down and work things out manually, but nowadays I wouldn't imagine that's the case. But it appears to be the case here. But why has it got to this stage where people are sitting down, pen and paper, calculator, working things out rather than hitting a button and getting a figure?
So there has been historical underinvestment in IT within the Scottish Public Pensions Agency. The reporting that my predecessor did there's both a Section 22 and a Section 23 report, 2017 or so, set out the circumstances surrounding what was ultimately an unsuccessful IT system implementation around pensions administration. And some of the legacy of that, Mr Simpson, is still felt today within the SPPA. They do not have an effective IT system that can allow them to do what you would, I think, as you not unreasonably would expect there to be an automation to some of the system to produce not just remedy statements, but some of the day-to-day business as usual within the SPPA. As Michael mentions, there's been a significant investment in additional staffing resources within the agency so that they can free up some of the more longer-standing members of staff to allow them to do some of the manual interventions and calculations necessary on individual records. As I look at the agency, though, it recognises that it needs to do more in terms of IT investment, but also data management. Both of these two processes need to be improved so that it can function, I think, as the committee would expect, but also members and deferred members, active members of these pension schemes can expect the level of automation service standards, the regular timely provision of annual benefit statements and some of the industry standards that will require investment. But you're right, what is happening is that there's a reliance on manual interventions, on expert pension administrators within the system, and as we've touched on already, there are long lead-in times to train people, to equip them with the level of expertise to allow them to make it. So there is no easy fix to this, but it does require considerable focus on IT, the level of transformation that you would expect of a modern pension administration provider.
Absolutely, it's really concerning. Do you know if they've ever looked at bringing in some help from the private sector to just get them through this period?
So again, I'll turn to colleagues in a moment, but I think they do use private sector systems. So they have an arrangement with Altair, I think is the name of the provider of pensions administration systems. The previous statutory reports I referred to were with planned engagement with also private sector providers. They have expertise, relevant expertise on their audit and risk committee and management advisory boards. So I don't think there's not a lack of diagnosis of where they might improve their arrangements, but I can see how the organisation's focus clearly currently is on addressing the challenges that are presenting and resolving remedy. But in due course, it will have to kind of accommodate both equipping them for what they need to be in the future and addressing the issues that they're facing today. But again, I'll pause if my colleagues want to say more.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that as they work through the complexities with remedy calculations, so there's a number of different categories that an individual case could be involved with. So it could be it could relate to marital statement, to status, divorce, pension sharing arrangements, for example, job changes, working pattern changes, ill health assessments, transfers in and out of the scheme over the period. The more categories that a member is involved in, the more complex the calculation becomes, particularly if it is already someone that is retired and then you've got retrospective adjustments to be made. In terms of the priority that the agency gave to police, that involved them developing 27 different software calculators. But what they can do is that they can use this to quicken the pace when it comes to the other schemes. They can use these software calculators, not just for remedy, but also for their business as usual activities. So the investment that they're spending on developing these calculators is not immediately lost in terms of their business as usual.
Okay, just for the committee's benefit, committee members probably haven't had a chance to read the letter that was forwarded to us, written to the convener of the Finance and Public Admin Committee, where interestingly it says there's a meeting between the SPPA Chief Exec and the Minister for Parliamentary Business today, with an agenda focused on what's called a deep dive of McLeod remedy delivery in the police pensions immediate choice cohort, whatever that is, member communications and engagement, and SPPA resources. So that's not a question for the Auditor General, it's just to highlight there's a meeting today and it would be good for us to get the outcome of that meeting. I've no further questions.
Absolutely, and we will follow that up, Graham, no problem at all. Can I now turn to the Deputy Convener to put some final questions to you and wrap this session up? Jamie.
Thank you. A lot of ground has been covered. I'll keep it brief. Auditor General, have you had a chance to review the two letters that Mr Simpson just referred to? There's one from the SPPA to Kenneth Gibson, and there's one from Ivan McKee, the Minister, to Kenneth Gibson, both dated yesterday. I appreciate. I just wondered if Audit Scotland's had a chance to briefly look at these before today's session.
We have, Deputy Convener. The agency shared them with Michael towards the end of the day yesterday, so I'm familiar and have the letters in front of me.
Okay, what do you make of them?
So I think, so you'll see from my report, one of the things that we comment on is the need for more transparency. And I think this is important. So it goes some way to being clearer on the scale of the issues that is in front of the agency and the need to better communicate. I think other aspects of it are helpful in that I think to Mr Simpson's last point about there's a great deal of technical language surrounding, so the fact that it sets out what it means following the back of the Finance Public Administration's Committee's questioning to the agency around who are the immediate choice cohort, what is an active cohort, but I don't think it kind of deviates me from my overall conclusions on the need for progress, better transparency around that progress. And then addressing what I think we've kind of set out in the report about there are some wider issues to be addressed in terms of digital and data capabilities within the agency to address the issue that is in front of them, but also to help transform their services for their members for the future.
I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate. I don't have a view on their efficacy or otherwise, but there's a lot of money in people in this public body. They've had an extra 100 staff. I mean, that jumped out at me, 100 additional staff, which begs the question as to how many staff do they have in the first place? Well, the letter yesterday said that's an increase of 30%. So let's assume they've got about 350 as a baseline, plus 100. So you're now looking at 400 or 450 staff. That's a massive jump for an agency in a single year. Looking at their budget, they've been given around £123 million. over the last 4 years. That includes this financial year coming. Just to administer the pension scheme. So that's £123 million of presumably public money from the Scottish Government to administer a pension before a single penny of pension is paid. Is that unusual? Is that proportionate?
So I think the point is that you're right about the numbers. There's been a significant increase in headcount to deal with the issues that are set out in these reports. That it's requiring considerable manual intervention. Takes a long time to train people. I think the Chief Exec said it takes about a year to equip somebody with the expertise to support the calculations as part of this process. Michael mentioned the number of additional calculators that have had to be developed to help them arrive at some of these judgments. There's also, I'm quite sure, a caseload of correspondence from people keen to understand about the situation with their statements. But the numbers reflect, I think, the lack of historic investment in digital capability. So this is still predominantly a manual-based enterprise of administering and then working out calculations. Whether that's the business model, that's a policy choice for ministers and advised by the Chief Executive, if that's the model that they wish to pursue. But you're right that it reflects, I think, the balance between people skills and expertise and digital capability.
I mean, they do allude to automation in their response to us. They seem to have made quite a lot of progress in that. We can ask them these questions, of course, when they come in, but they want. I think the phrase that I actually quite liked is that we want to ensure that we get it right first time, so that yes, they will have to spend a bit of time on the calculators, working out how to remedy. But then once that's done, the automation of that process can rattle through the case backlog. I assume is what they're saying to us, reading between the lines. Isn't that a good thing, though? I mean, wouldn't you want to spend a bit more time setting up those processes, presumably with some manual oversight and intervention, and then once you're comfortable that what comes out at the other end of that machine is accurate figures, I'm sure the last thing they want, given the context of Mr Beattie's line of questioning, is to get through it quickly, produce wrong information, and then people are getting statements that are either over, under, or wildly different. It's hard to criticise them for that approach, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's very fair, actually. I think the automation point is really interesting, and and some inevitability about what people's and members' expectations are. People broadly think they'll be able to log on with the right user ID and password onto the website and get their statement.
Yeah.
To be able to see what their benefits are, and there will be calculators available for them that they can project and work out for their individual circumstances. But I think for just revisiting some of the evidence that was given by the Chief Executive and his colleagues to the Finance and Public Administration Committee, I think also noted that automation was being developed with the Scottish Government Centre of Excellence, and in some cases that was reducing tasks. In some cases were taking an hour to 2 hours down to cases 5 to 20 minutes. So that's a good thing in terms of organisational efficiency. But that it was going to take them so far, and not necessarily for some of these really highly complex cases to review. But your overall point, Deputy Convener, yeah, I agree. I think automation will be a feature of pensions administration, and that may increase organisational efficiency, but with the right safeguards. That for those complex cases, that are still some levels of appropriate human oversight.
Do you know if these 100 additional staff are just temporary contractors to deal with this issue, or is there now an expectation that their base level of full-time equivalent has just rocketed?
I think Michael mentioned that they were on temporary contracts, but you're right, it will be an important part. I think it's a kind of wider assessment of what does the future of the agency hold in terms of its workforce planning, its adoption of technology. Those will be key pillars of what is a baseline for the provision of service. And in many ways, there'll be a complexity in doing so while they're dealing with remedy. So as our report sets out based on the agency's forecasts, you could be into 2028 before they're clearing the backlog of remedy. But I think at that point, how their workforce interacts with technology and what their scenarios and forecasts will be will shape what the new baseline will be.
Like others, I think I'd be concerned that somebody, particularly of a later stage in life, retired, perhaps with health issues, might have to wait 2 years to get that backlog payment, that back payment in their bank accounts when they could be benefiting from that now. It's quite concerning. I know they're complex cases, some of them are quite lengthy, but do you think that should be sped up? Do you think there should be a target of getting through this backlog more quickly so that these, presumably pensioners for the most part, will get their money?
So I think it speaks to the heart of why I decided to do a Section 22 report. I felt that there was a public interest and an individual pensioner interest in supporting parliamentary scrutiny through this committee. They brought to support additional transparency, to help the agency meet their new objectives of realistic deadlines. Certainly not for me to suggest an alternative one, I would say, Deputy Convener, but that deadlines that are set are deemed to be realistic, avoiding what I think we've set out in the earlier stages of the report, that there were overly optimistic deadlines, that these need to be realistic, appropriate, but also appropriately stretching. So if there's now 100 additional staff, that is also, and that learning that's going through the organisation, if you're working through complex cases, it'll be for the Chief Executive and his colleagues to take that view about whether 2028 is still the right deadline or whether there's a better date, and communicate it appropriately to members.
That's helpful, thank you. And my final question is, in the other letter that was literally thrust under our nose at the beginning of the session, but I have had a chance to read through it. It's quite short, but it's from the Minister, again, to the FPA committee. I was quite struck by the tone. It seems very different, less contrite perhaps to the other letter. The first 2 pages are essentially a kind of veritable why this isn't my fault, this isn't the Scottish Government's fault, this is the UK Government's fault. I've got no interest in the politics of all of this, but he did make some points which I thought you may reflect on. On the first page, it says that this whole issue is extended from the fact that the UK Government did not understand the complexity of the remedy and had set unrealistic timeframes. There were 3 specific accusations made. One is that they shouldn't have made the changes in the first place because they weren't EHRC compatible. Secondly, that there wasn't enough work done to identify what timeframes would be needed to remedy. Therefore, the deadlines were unrealistic completely. And the fact that they were supposed to issue guidance to various public agencies, and that the guidance actually arrived after the deadlines had passed. Now, those are quite profound criticisms of the government by another government. Any thoughts or reflections?
I cover those as appropriate. The third point I think we touched on in our report, some of the guidance did arrive after the deadline. So inevitably that was part of the narrative as to why they weren't met on time. In terms of the judgment, clearly we have a judicial judgment about and the complexities involved. So I won't take a position on that other than to note that the MacLeod Sargent case judgment was made. It did identify that there had been age discrimination in the original intent to move. What the background to this was to move scheme members from a final salary to a career average scheme, but that the protections that were offered were deemed to not be consistent with age discrimination. And on that basis, Convener, I think we're content with what we've set out in our report, really, that there needs to be transparent communication and addressing the remaining cases for remedy statement to be addressed. We know there's a lot of work still to do for the agency, and recognising, I think as you've touched on in your earlier questions about the additional investment of public money in the agency, that it does so as quickly as is realistic and in due course identifies what it means for its future operating model.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I knew before I asked the question I wouldn't be able to drag you into that territory, but I do note it because it's markedly different in its response. They were both issued on the same day in terms of how we've got to where we're at, and how better things are looking. But anyway, I presume more will come out in the wash when we speak to the body themselves. But thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and can I thank you for your evidence this morning on this really important report. Michael Oliphant, Stuart Nugent, Auditor General, thank you. We will be convening a special meeting of the committee on Tuesday the 17th of March, where we will be taking evidence from the Chief Executive of the Scottish Public Pensions Agency, as well as the Director General Corporate from the Scottish Government, because there is some responsibility in that quarter as well. So we will look forward to that session and being able to put some questions to them. This is, as I understand it, the final public session, Auditor General, that you will be in attendance at the Public Audit Committee. And I just want to say on behalf of the committee a great thanks to the staff at Audit Scotland, to you especially for your outstanding leadership of the organisation, the public service you provide, the spotlight that you shine in the public interest, the quality and standard of the work that you produce, I think is exceptional. And it allows us as a committee to be able to scrutinise public bodies in the way that we have been able to do over the last certainly 5 years while I've been chairing it. Colin Beattie goes back even further. But the work that you do provides not just this committee and this Parliament with an important public service, it also provides the public with a hugely important public service. So I just wanted to put that on behalf of this committee on the record this morning. Thank you. And I will now move the committee into private session.